most people just don't want to talk about it. I know it, I never did, but everybody needs to, because the coolant is probably the one thing that is going to touch every single part you manufacture.
If you're one of the folks out there, like myself, who overlooks coolant mistakenly without realizing its significance, you need to pay attention to what John and I are about to talk about, the impacts of cost and productivity when it comes to coolant. John is the expert, and John, I'm ready to learn. I know the audience is ready to learn. Let's talk about some of these impacts when it comes to coolant.
Well, great, thanks Tony. Yeah, coolant is a major factor in being productive in the shop, and most people just don't want to talk about it. I know it, I never did, but everybody needs to, because the coolant is probably the one thing that is going to touch every single part you manufacture. And if it's the wrong coolant, it screws up your entire productivity of the whole shop. So it's not just about one part, it's about every part.
That is instantly valuable information and so true. And I know you and I have talked, but it's important to convey this audience as well. We're talking a massive percentage. We're talking not 5%, not 3%, not 10%, 20, 30% of overall cost, because it is touching everything that you can help people get back, put in their pocket, or invest in other aspects of their machine shop. Am I correct?
Exactly. Sometimes will be just a percent or two, but often we're seeing 30, 40, 50% cost savings to a particular shop. And people don't think about how little coolant is actually costing per part. Coolant costs less than 1% of the cost of a part. And pretty much everybody knows 3 to 5% of the cost of a part is the tooling. But tooling is a much more difficult thing because you may have 5, 10, 20 different tools in contact with an individual part, but then you have different tools for every single part. But again, coolant is the one common thing. So it's an easy one to go after, but it affects everything in your shop.
Yeah, it does. And like you mentioned, when it comes to the different tools, some of the tool changers we have now have hundreds of different tools with pallet change systems, whatever it might be, that's going to run parts through the night. So overall, I would imagine, especially coming from your side, the value of having the right coolant for the right material and the right tools can massively reduce costs on tooling itself, but also on finished products and ultimately, possibly even the machine and the life of the machine.
That and a lot of other things people don't even think about. So
let's get into those then.
Yeah, let's get into those. So about 30, 31% of the cost of a part is your labor.
Okay.
So think about a shop that has a real bad odor issue.
Almost every shop I've been into?
Yeah, many shops. Fortunately, probably not those with master in them.
No.
So you get a couple of operators who are unhappy with the smell, and they move on to another shop. Think about in today's market what it takes to find a new employee, train them, and then deal with all their mistakes as they're coming up to speed. That's a huge cost. So that's a big one. Or just think of one single workman's comp claim, and that could erase tons of saving from a cheap coolant. So your coolant has a big effect just on the labor part of it.
That is something I hadn't thought of, kind of how we brought this conversation in, right? Because, we're all talking about the labor shortage from different perspectives, the fact of training people, getting people on board. We know how expensive that can be. And honestly, John, I can tell you, when I was working in the machine shop, I'd have to go home and shower every day, wash my clothes every day, and I immediately, within 5 minutes, was reeking like the shop. And when I looked at the coolant, oftentimes there'd be foam and mold and gunk, and it would just sit there for a long amount of time. But honestly, guys, that was normal to me, and I'm finding out now, years and years later, talking with John, it's not normal, and it doesn't need to be normal. And I'm walking around here right now, everything smells fantastic in here, including you, John.
Gee, thanks. Yeah, we talked about the machine tool. Just think, if we could increase your speeds and feeds just 2, 3, 4, 5% because you're using the right coolant, think of how much more money you would make.
So that one to me is more obvious because I know that one to be true first-hand basis. When I get into, more flutes in an operation, and I know how fast that RPM is going, and I know what happens if my flutes are rubbing instead of cutting on a part. If I have the wrong coolant, that's going to continue to create that base that's just going to rub the part instead of cut the part. So massively, I understand that one. And how much tools do we use in a year And if we have the right coolant, how many less of those tools are we using before we wear them out?
Exactly. And coolant is such a small part of the part, or cost of the part, but it's also a small percentage of what you spend on tooling. So you should only be going through 10% on your coolant of what you spend on your tooling. So if you're spending $20,000 a month on tools, you should be spending less than $2,000 a month on your coolant. If you're spending more than that, you either have the wrong coolant or you're doing it the wrong way.
And I know we're going to have another video that's going to go into all of those situations. But talking with you, I am definitely one of those guys that took coolant, dumped it into the back, took my hose, put it into the back. We already know that's a problem, and that's how money is being spent instantly. It doesn't need to be that way.
You're right, and that is where we say if you're spending more than 10% on coolant than what you are on your of what you're spending on your tooling, you're spending way too much, which means things like that are happening, and that's just costing you money. And we want to help you save money.
Well, John, going back to the fact that I needed to shower as soon as I walked into the machine shops and clean clothes, there's more to it than just the smell, right? We want to be able to breathe effectively. And you also talked about, well, one workman's comp. So we're talking about cleaner environments as well, aren't we?
Yeah, cleaner environments overall. And just think of as a shop owner and you want to bring customers in, you don't want to see residues all over the inside of your machine. You don't want foam all over the floor. You don't want to have that waste of all that foam that's getting mopped up because it's spilling out of the machine and you're throwing that away. That's all a waste. It's not good for the environment. It's not good for the bottom line. With the right coolant, you get rid of all that excess waste.
Yeah, and recycling is another topic we're going to get into later, so stay tuned for that video also. As we move forward with this, let's talk a little bit about machine downtime that also goes with coolant. Now, I don't know how extreme you want to talk about machine downtime, whether it's the ability to keep the spindle running all the time or the fact that I have personally utilized through spindle coolant before and clogged it up and my machine spindle went down because I wasn't effectively cleaning my coolant tank.
Well, think of the loss of the raw material you have, the blank you have in there. Maybe it's a titanium part, maybe you've spent $10,000, $20,000 on that blank. And all of a sudden the machine has to come to a stop because the pump stops working. You have sensors that are being fouled by residue or something like that. And now all of a sudden you break a tool in the part and either it's a big rework or it's scrap. And that could be very costly. So maintaining your coolant can reduce the scrap and your rework as well.
Well, I'm going to ask you a personal question since you've been doing this for 15 years or more, right? You've been doing this a long time. You have a lot of wisdom. Why do you think ultimately people overlook coolant? When we're tooling up our system, we think cutting tools, we think work holding, we think about the machine, maybe the software that goes along with it. Why do you think it's an afterthought when it should be top of the list priority when it comes to touching every part, bringing this full circle again to the beginning of the conversation?
Most people don't understand it, and because they don't understand it, they just ignore it. And our whole so part of why we're here with you is we want to work on that understanding. How does it affect my bottom line if I'm an owner of a company? How does it affect me on a personal basis as an operator? I've had conversations with operators. You know, you said you had that smell, the funk. The guys talk about, I go home, my kids come running in, they smell me, they stop short and go, daddy, daddy, ooh, stop, go away. Or your wife or husband or spouse, whoever, makes you change outside or in the garage before they even let you in the house. You don't have to have that. So on an operator level, coolant shouldn't be this bad experience. From an owner's level, you should be making lots of money. So a little bit of care, a little bit of time, you can make a lot more money and you can have a much nicer life.
Absolutely well said. We all want to have a good life. We all want to understand coolant more. In doing so, Master Fluid Solutions, this is my buddy John. Reach out anytime. They are more than happy to help and educate you just like they've done me, because trust me, it's gonna help.